Welcome to the Power of Ideas. In today's conversation, RC is talking with Nell Irvin Painter, well-known historian and author, about race and American society.
How did you become an historian? What was the route you took to get there?
I think I was born a historian. I think I have a historian gene.
Okay.
I did not do history as an undergraduate at Berkeley. I did anthropology because I thought history was a pack of lies. Now, I graduated from Berkeley in 1964, so you can imagine what kind of history I would have studied if I had studied history. I had brushed up against it in high school, and I knew I didn't want to have anything to do with it because I could look around the country and the world around me, and the history seemed to be entirely different, and it didn't ever touch the issues that were burning for me.
So coming from that era, you were fundamentally skeptical about the enterprise of history.
Absolutely. I wanted nothing to do with it. And I didn't come back around to history until I started doing other people's history. So I became a historian of medieval France when I studied in Bordeaux. And that was a different history in which I didn't have so much to lose. Actually, I had nothing to lose. And then my next step into history was the history of pre-colonial Africa, which I studied in Africa at the University of Ghana. So that got me back into my genetic inheritance, so to speak. I'll tell you why I call it genetic inheritance. When I graduated from high school, we had a battery of tests. And one group of tests was to discover what you're most interested in. So I did all these multiple choice test examples. And then another was what you have aptitude in. My aptitude and my interest were history. I was 100 percentile in both, and I thought, well, this shows that these tests don't know anything.
Could you give us a sense, your sense, of the current state of race relations in America? I know this is a lot. We don't have 4 hours. But, how would you shape that?
Well, a caveat. I am an optimist. I'm a congenital optimist also. I have an optimist gene. So I'll always find the most hopeful spin to put on situations. There's some things, of course, I have no spin for. And hate crimes is one of them. But even though we have witnessed horrific hate crimes recently, there's the Jasper murder, there's the beating of the gay young man in Wyoming, right next door to my own New Jersey, there's the police killing of Amadou Diallo. You know, so there are all these issues that come up. But one thing that I think we should keep in mind as we step back a little bit and put this in historical perspective is that these things would not have been news 25 or 30 years ago. As I was talking with the students in my seminar before we came over here, we were talking about responses to the assassination of Malcolm X. And I was saying that there was a kind of one level of media understanding that the vast majority of Americans tied into. And so the assassination of Malcolm X was an event. But there's another medium, as Ben Keppel said, below the radar, for large numbers of people of color and African Americans that stretched back to time immemorial, in which you have death and beatings and assassinations and lynchings. And so there, the assassination of Malcolm X became just one more step on a gory road. So keeping that in mind, the Jasper case, for instance, belongs to a very long tradition, which was a hidden tradition until quite recently.
I appreciate what you're saying because it was so shocking to everyone, particularly the dragging of that man in Texas, that just the implications of that were just so awful. And most of us have a sense that there's been a kind of progress and we're here, and those crimes suggested, well, maybe we're not here, we're back there. But then you're saying, well, at least it's news now.
Yes.
Before it wouldn't have been.
That's right.
It wouldn't have been news.
Because I wrote a book about the United States at the turn of the 20th century called Standing at Armageddon, and that book ends in 1919, which was the year of the Red Summer. among other things. And the Red Summer included anti-black riots with precisely this kind of assassination, dragging to death. How many Americans know about that?
Is it possible that at some historical moments where we really are going into a new era, there's a little flourish of the old before the new era starts? You know what I'm saying?
No, I think this stuff happens.
It's been happening
It's
all
been
along.
happening. It unfortunately will happen again. And there was actually more of it happening earlier in the century. So for instance, 1892, something like 200 lynchings.
Right.
And we have a lynching that was 1998. And it's big news. It wasn't big news in 1992. It wasn't big news in 1931. This is really squeezing to get some hopeful portent out of that. But I think that we have to face up to the fact that we have a very bloody past.
Another big event in '98 was the President's Initiative on Race. I think it was initiated, the project was initiated in November of '97, went on for most of '98, the report came out the end of '98, coming into '99. What's your reaction to that? That kind of initiative, in general, this particular initiative, was this a good thing to do? Has it been productive at all?
I don't know if it's been productive. That's harder to gauge, and that's something that time will tell. But I think it was a good idea. I think Americans really need to talk a lot about race. And I know that it gets tiresome, so we can't talk about it probably as much as it needs to be talked about, because it hurts your stomach. It really is a difficult and sometimes blood-curdling undertaking. However, I do disagree, I respectfully disagree with my older colleague and respected friend, John Hope Franklin, who said...
Who was on the advisory board for
He was the head of it.
Yeah.
And so he decided that slavery and black-white race and racism must be the focus. I agree with him that that must be a crucial starting point, but I don't think you can talk productively about race in America in our time without dealing with multicultural America. It's true that other people get slotted into the black-white scheme. So, for instance, Asians get slotted in as white. Dark-colored West Indians get slotted in as black. Probably all Haitians, no matter what color they are, get slotted in as black. But it still is the case that black-white no longer suffices. And if I were to do it, I would do all the different racial ethnic groups and also have a big slot called white, because we need to examine what whiteness is.
Do you think that possibly whatever that project, the One America Initiative on Race project, lacked in terms of substance and other things it could have included, is it possible that as a moral reference, the government said this, the president felt this, an advisory board of blue ribbon people served, this happened, it went on for a year, at least it gives us a very important moral touchstone, wouldn't you think?
Yes.
And there's value in that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
We're on board for that. Okay, I want to take you back to your Sojourner Truth book. It came out in what,
1996.
96.
October 96.
Which I enjoyed reading very, very much. I think most people would think of you as maybe a 19th century American historian,
Which
scholar.
is what I am.
Yeah,
yes.
Exactly. Why did you go to Sojourner Truth? Was there something she had to teach you about race in America? Did you learn something about race in America from her?
Let me take the second question and maybe come back to the first one.
Okay.
I learned a great deal, and I'm a little embarrassed to say this because I am a 19th century historian and I've written a lot about 19th century America. I was shocked by the depth of racism and white supremacy in 19th century America. I shouldn't have been. Maybe it's because I had done much of my earlier work in Southern history. And so I was used to maybe at some level I was thinking, oh, that's just the South. And when I ran into it in the North, it was shocking. the everyday humiliations visited on Black Americans, it's just unthinkable in our world.
Let's see, she lived to what, 1883?
She was born in about 1797.
Okay.
And she died in 1883. She was born in Ulster County in the Hudson River Valley in New York. And she died in Battle Creek, Michigan, which was sort of the Berkeley of Michigan, Berkeley of the then West. And just I call it white supremacy because even though that's an older term, I think it more captures what was going on. Just the assumption that white people were the summa, and to be somebody was to be with or near respectable white people. Just, oh sure, that's how it is.
She was illiterate, but a very powerful orator, right? And
interestingly enough, when Sojourner Truth died in 1883, the obituaries say, intelligent woman, extraordinary intelligence, great wit, smart, intelligent. The word intelligent comes up over and over and over again. As her memory becomes less of the historical person and more of the symbol, she becomes quaint, strong, exotic, and intelligence falls away. And intelligent she was.
Was she more familiar to you when you started, and did she become, in a sense, stranger to you?
Yes, and you're the first person who's asked me that, like that. Most people assume that as I would come to know her better,
you feel
she
so
would,
close to her. But
yeah, you're absolutely right.
so you had probably a better sense of her as somebody different from you, is what you're saying.
Exactly.
As you got to know her better.
I started off knowing the symbol, who is a feminist symbol, a symbol of strong Black womanhood, very familiar in our culture. And as I got to know the world she lived in, particularly the pre-abolitionist world, this perfectionist in the religious sense, Pentecostal, that world, weird, for me at least. There millions of Americans would recognize that right away today, but I did not recognize it right away.
I have such a strong sense of you as an ethical voice when I read you. Why is historical truth so important for you?
The short answer is that I'm a historian, and that's what historians do. But something else is going on, and I'm very pleased that you picked it up. And that is that that's part of my mission, in a way, as a historian of a certain kind. That is to say, I'm a sort of cultural studies historian, and historians fight about these things. Some historians are give me the facts historians, and some historians are give me the meaning historian, and I'm a meaning historian. So I do history in a particular way, but also I wanted to shake us out of some of those ruts. And one rut is confusing the symbols of our own culture with what happened in the past.
Is your concern that the layering of what's happened in the past has the capacity to mesmerize us and confuse us, and all we've got is that blade of rational inquiry to break through that?
That's a much more elegant way of putting it than I would.
I have this,
the short answer is yes.
There seems to be a lot at stake as you pursue these things. Your example, Ain't I a Woman? Could you tell that real quick?
Aren't I a woman?
Aren't I a woman?
Very, very briefly. People who know Sojourner Truth, and lots of Americans know Sojourner Truth now. This is something else that's changed since we were children, that young kids in K through 12 learn at least a tiny smattering of African American history, which they would not learn, we did not learn in school.
Right.
So they've heard of Sojourner Truth, and they've heard of Aren't I a Woman? And Aren't I a Woman is what she supposedly said. Turns out, and here...
This is the moment when she was speaking to a group,
supposedly.
and she was challenged on some...
Wait.
Okay, sorry. Okay, go ahead.
So, the symbolic Sojourner Truth is associated with Aren't I a Woman? Sojourner Truth, Aren't I a Woman? Turns out that if you go back and check how that story came to be, it's part of a creation, an elaboration of Sojourner Truth. of part of a discussion that Sojourner Truth joined in 1851 in Akron, Ohio, reported 12 years later by a woman writer named Frances Dana Gage, who expanded tremendously upon the record that somebody was actually writing down while she was speaking, and invented "Aren't I a Woman?" Well, it works for us because we still need to hear that. And it's really neat to have a black woman whose image we possess, whose words we can put with the image. So Sojourner Truth is one of a tiny handful of 19th century black American women whose image we can see. That is not an accident. She had her pictures taken and she sold them. She distributed them on purpose.
So she did not say, you worked out, you discovered, and you're absolutely certain, she did not say this line that was attributed to her.
That's right.
Wouldn't there be historians that would say, and maybe not, that the usefulness of understanding that line that in fact she didn't say is so great that maybe we should just leave it as is?
Oh, yes.
And you don't. You say, look, I've explored this rationally, it didn't happen, I've got to tell the truth.
Yeah, and that's what historians do. But in my coda, I say, well, if it comes to a head-to-head between me and Aren't I a Woman, most Americans will go with Aren't I a Woman. Okay.
Who influenced you as an historian, as a thinker?
Probably my parents, actually. I'm pretty much self-taught. I mean, I do have degrees and all that, but a lot of it was self-taught. And then also my peers, notably my friends. You know, we were in graduate school in the early 70s, and we were groping around. I was very fortunate to be at Harvard with a magnificent library. So I had a carrel in the stacks of Widener Library, and right next to me there was the library of Charles Sumner. And I used to just stand there and read it.
Are you self-taught? I think you say that modestly. Was this a necessity given what you're looking into?
Yes.
I think of Toni Morrison's comment that when she did the research to write Beloved, she was shocked at what was not on the shelf.
Yes.
She had to go out and dig the stuff out herself. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes.
There are no materials very often.
Well, the materials are here now, 1999. The materials exist in abundance, and I'm afraid I get very testy with people who say, oh, we can't find this. Why don't you guys write this? I say, we have! Because there's just lots and lots and lots of stuff.
Things have changed.
Absolutely. And the reference materials alone, Black Women in America, the 2-volume set by Darlene Clark Hine, 2 volumes of an encyclopedia of black women. The Encarta Africana, CD-ROM, 2 CD-ROMs of African American and African. I mean, the stuff is there now. In the early 70s, we were just beginning, and so we were feeling our way. And when Toni Morrison, who's my colleague, talks about her own research, she is talking about research. Yes, definitely.
Wonderful writer. What about the debt that everybody working in this field owes to W.E.B. Du Bois at this point? Could you talk about that a little bit? Didn't he sort of break ground as far as understanding race relations in America?
Yes and no.
Okay.
Yes, because W. Du Bois is a great thinker and someone who wrote across 2 or 3 genres, and whose work, notably Souls of Black Folk and Black Reconstruction, laid the basis, the intellectual basis for much of what we build on. No, because here we are in the 1990s. In the 90s, we have a mountain of material. In the 70s, our debt was much clearer to Du Bois. But here we have all of this work by historians, by social scientists, psychologists, sociologists, and so forth. So there's just a lot now between us and Du Bois.
When you think about the function of race in America, do you think in terms of that sort of basic notion of Du Bois's two-ness, of a community in some ways pitted against itself, a kind of double consciousness? Is that white and black. Is that still a...
Now I don't.
You don't?
I found that very useful when I first read it when I was a kid in Souls of Black Folk, because it gave words to the meaning that I was experiencing in school. Du Bois says one ever feels one's two-ness of seeing yourself, knowing yourself as an individual, as a person who's grown up with a particular family and a particular set of parents and a particular set of experiences. You are yourself. But also seeing how people see you and react to just this sort of sheet of dark. I'll tell you very quickly a funny story. I have to expurgate part of it because some of the language was a little raw. I like to walk on a towpath that we have in New Jersey on the Delaware and Raritan Canal. And one day, a woman came with a dog off a leash. And the dog charged me. Now, I'm not afraid of dogs, but I was really angry at this woman. And I said, "Put your dog on a leash." She said, "Oh, he won't hurt you." I said, the dog is charging at me. I said, "Put your dog on a leash." "Well, don't be afraid, your dog, it's a nice dog." I said, "Put your..."
The expurgated part right there.
So she made me so angry that I went back and I called the ranger. And this is a big deal. It was a cold morning. I had to call the ranger. I had to sit in my car in my wet clothes. And so when the ranger came, she talked to the woman. And the woman told the ranger that I had called her a white. Well, I had called her a...
We know what you said.
Right. And so later on, you know, I did encounter her again, actually, and I said, "I'm sorry, you had to lie to the ranger." And, you know, to me, it wasn't a racial thing. You know, I was angry at this dog and this woman who wouldn't put it on a leash. But because she saw black person, she heard race. And that's kind of a funny way of, you know, of interpreting the two-ness. Right. But this is why I see that it's very useful to have someone who's made a neat formulation.
Could you talk, following up on that, could you talk a little bit about the difficulty of being a black public intellectual and scholar? And I know you've talked about this before, just very briefly. In one interview, the interviewer started drawing comparisons between you and Sojourner Truth. You're black, she's black, you're tall, she's tall, etc. It seems that there's a kind of pressure to sort of make you fit some pre-existent mold. What's that like?
And this goes back to your earlier conversation about what I wanted to do in my work with Sojourner Truth. And that was to say, look, there's more than one way of being a black woman. Black people are people. That sounds so simple. But so much of how we generalize about the United States denies the existence of black people. So America is a great democracy, always has been, always will be. Hey, what about the South? You know, slavery was a national institution during the early part of Sojourner Truth's life. Hey, what about... So if you're going to include black people, or Native Americans for that matter, if we're really going to see us as people, then a lot of assumptions need adjusting.
I really see your point about Sojourner Truth now in relation to you, where it was convenient to have a certain soundbite that kept her simple. The reality is more complex and less clear-cut.
And this is exactly the point in my book. Sojourner Truth, a life, a symbol. Symbol, simple. Life, ooh.
If you had to, we talked about some awful hate crimes at the beginning of this discussion. If you had to focus on something you would say is a real sign of progress, a trend over the last 20 or 30 years, what would you point to? Something really good in race relations.
Let's see. Well, the first thing would be the national legislation. The Civil Rights Act and Voting Rights Act. Absolutely crucial.
Essential.
Yeah. And the dismantling of legal segregation, absolutely crucial. And those two phenomena really lay the groundwork for all the changes that have come. I've been particularly heartened by the intellectual changes that have occurred since the civil rights movement, and ways in which Americans are able to see African Americans as people with history, but also now, more and more, to understand the valence of whiteness in black, white, or black, white, brown, yellow, red, that white people are not simply the unraced, neutral backdrop.
They're not unmarked.
Right. Well, I mean, the point of being white is to be unmarked. And I can understand when white people get impatient when people like me say, but you're white, you're not unmarked, because they have only to lose.
What advice would you give white people? And I'm sure you don't want to be put on this spot exactly, but let's say you are for a moment.
Yeah.
What 2-3 pieces of advice would you give them about race relations?
For what purpose?
To sort of advance the cause of justice in America.
Okay, see whiteness. See white privilege. I think the first step very often for white people in discovering that race exists and that it has a past and it has a present and it's important is to want to know more about black people. Well, that's fine, and you should know more about black people, and now the material exists. But also to understand white people as white people, not simply as normal, not simply as unmarked.
I am so sorry that we're out of time. Nell Irvin Painter, thank you so much for visiting with us today.
Thank you. It's really been a pleasure.
It's been great.
Good.
And thank you for visiting with us, and we'll see you next time.